Show of hands, did anyone have a chance to just, even if it was briefly, sit down and look at Revelation 16? Oh, oh, oh. Oh, yeah, 15. All right. Okay. Thank you. Oh, boy. Well, I'll put my glasses on for this. Hey, you know what? Let's read. Let's read chapter 15. We just got 8 verses here, and that's not too high of a bar to get through, don't you think? So who knows? Before we get there, anyone just real quickly want to give me some highlights of last week? What happened? What did we see? The harvesting of the earth, yes. And how many harvests did we see? 2. And you guys remember what the 2 harvests were? They used the word ripe, and we saw that in the original text there were 2 forms of ripe. Do you remember what they were? Go on, Dennis. I expect you to know one of them. Overripe. So the second harvest was the overripe, the only, in their mind, only good for wine. And then before that was another kind of harvest, which was the dry harvest. So like the green stalk, the formerly green stalks of wheat were dry. And so the wheat was brought in. And we're reminded of the parable of the wheat and the tares, aren't we? But that is when I think it's safe to say the wheat will be separated from the tares. And then, so what was the implication? Actually, it wasn't just an implication. We saw it fulfilled of the overripe. What happens to the overripe grapes? They get crushed. Yeah, and that was definitely equated to Isaiah, wasn't it? Who is he who comes out of Edom in crimson? It was we saw the bringing in of the saints. We saw the crushing of the apostate, of the unbelievers, of the wickedness. And now in chapter 15, we get another one of those glorious rests. A beautiful scene here that I'll read to you. Starts out with a little bit of well, you'll see it's kind of an ominous couple of lines here, and then we get to this glorious throne room scene. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite things in the book of Revelation is these throne room scenes. There've been a few now, and they're pretty awesome. So we'll just pick it up in chapter 15. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last. For with them the wrath of God is finished. And I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mingled with fire, and also those who had conquered the beast and its image, and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass, with harps of God in their hands, and they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God, the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. After this, I looked, and the sanctuary of the tent of witness in heaven was opened. And out of the sanctuary came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, clothed in pure bright linen, with golden sashes around their chests. And one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the sanctuary was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no one could enter the sanctuary until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were finished. Wow. Pretty, in a way, it's a pretty straightforward scene, isn't it? We can see this. We can see this. And yet, we have some questions, don't we? We have some questions. First, it starts out, well, before I talk, yeah, you guys, jump in here. Stuff that stood out to you. More observations. Yeah, the Song of Moses. Yeah, so that'd be Exodus 15. Exodus 15, the Song of Moses. And now to give you some timeline here, there's two major interpretations of the timeline of what we've seen here. So the first one would be that this is a fast forward to the conclusion of all things. And then 16 goes back. And so in other words, we jump ahead in 15 to see the summation of all things, the conclusion of everything, and here are the saints before the throne. And then in 16, we go back to the vials being poured out on the earth. And the other sort of major view is that again, this is the culmination of all. Pretty much everyone agrees this is a culmination of all things here, and that these are the saints in glory after the harvest of 14, and right on the heels of chapter 16. So it's a minor difference. But where this comes in is the idea that the saints have been brought to heaven, and then we have been we met him in the air as was predicted. We are in heaven, and then God's wrath finally in its fullness is poured out on the earth. Or the other view, this is sort of the would it be the well, I don't know what camp it would be in, but this is the other major view, is that chapter 15 is kind of the fulfillment of everything, but these are the folks who survived the outpouring of the wrath. They've survived the tribulation, and they have come to faith during this time, and they have rejected the mark of the beast. This is sort of the, I guess it's more of a dispensational view, but I really think it's a very minor difference. And I don't really think in one way or the other, really thought a lot about this. It doesn't affect our interpretation of this really in any major way. There's widely held agreement that whether this is a special 144,000 who are redeemed during the time of tribulation, or this is representative of all the saints, that this scene that we see in 15 is representative of all the saints' status at the end of time, before the throne of God. This is, whether this is a select group or this represents the entirety of the saints through all history, kind of doesn't matter, really. And 16, widespread agreement that 16 is the final outpouring of God's wrath. And we'll get into that when we read 16. Whether there's saints on earth when this happens, whether we've all been secretly raptured or publicly raptured, or doesn't really matter. But here, for now, for today, we're looking at a glorious celebration and worship service in heaven of saints who have been redeemed, who have conquered through the blood of the Lamb. Any other thoughts, comments? Hope that kind of helped us place it in. Now, we'll make a case for this. If this is a culmination scene, which most people agree that it is, then I think that lends weight to the interpretation that Revelations is a series of vision cycles, rather than trying to thread chapters 1 through 22 into one long narrative. I believe this adds weight to the idea that we're seeing all of history shown to us in different ways, different interpretations from different viewpoints. But that's just me. That's my my argument for that case. That it makes a bit more sense. It makes a lot more sense to me. If everyone agrees that 15 and 16 are a culmination scene, then we're hard pressed to thread this into one long narrative that still has 6 chapters to go. Any other thoughts, comments, observations? How about this song of, we talked about it a little bit. Some implications or connections you guys see with the Song of Moses. So are they praising, let me just ask a leading question. Song of Moses, are they up there praising Moses? Is that what they mean by a Song of Moses? No. That's an easy question. Praising what God has done, and they're recalling Moses. But more broadly, what are they recalling? Yeah. Yeah.
It's an image to us of our own personal salvation. But it's a Passover, not Passover, but Feast of Unleavened Bread. Right after Passover, part of the same story. But it occurs over and over again through history. Probably the people groups, in some sense, but particularly to the Jews, but also the people groups.
Yeah.
You could say the English had their, or the French, or the Europe, or whatever, had their opportunity. They had their revival. And it made a big difference in their culture. But when they depart from God, then there's kind of an automatic, because what God has is good. And if you leave the good, what are you going to get? Not going to get good.
Right. Yeah.
That pertains to the Christian school.
Yeah.
That's not the point. So.
Oh no, this is open. I like it. Let's dig down into that that connection with the Jewish people and their story of deliverance out of Egypt. Because I think the imagery is really calling this up. Not only do we explicitly say the Song of Moses, but what else do we see in this passage that brings that to our mind? they find themselves in a very historically familiar position. Where are they? Where does it say they physically are standing? Beside the sea. Now, there's a critical difference here, though, because one can imagine, I'm going to ask you guys to use your imagination a fair bit here, the people of Israel, that was a tumultuous scene. Even in their victory, it must have been a wildly tumultuous scene. And granted, I can't help but see, Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments. Someone asked me what my favorite movie was the other day, and I think that might be it, just because I remember seeing it as a kid. It was so grand, so amazing. It really helped me. I mean, come on, it's a great movie, but really helped me visualize this. But that I think they depicted it pretty well. I mean, the sea was roaring and raging, and there's soldiers flailing in it, and horses drowning, and I mean, that was a tumultuous scene. But how about here? The sea of glass. That is a great question. So we don't know. We don't know. That is sort of a new imagery here. As we'll see, like in chapter 16, we see the word Armageddon. Another kind of new image. It's only, that word's only recorded once in the Bible, and it's there in chapter 16. Kind of similar here, the sea mixed with fire. So a couple thoughts from some theologians on this. It is evocative. Again, they kind of dig down into this theme of being led, the people being led out of Egypt. And so they make a connection between the sea of glass and its clarity and the guiding pillar of God's fire at night, leading them through the deep, leading them through the darkness. A lot of biblical writers saw in that sea of glass, that calm, tranquil sea of glass, a reminder of God's fire and wrath that is not falling on them, falling on them. And so they kind of see these two things in that imagery. And I saw that pretty much across the board from my favorite Plymouth Brethren eschatological writer here, Dennert, all the way to Hendrickson. They kind of saw this clarity in the glass, the leading presence of the Lord in the sea through murky deep, and also a withholding of God's wrath in that fire. And then one writer I thought was pretty good. He was a more modern writer. He says, I have no idea what the fire in the sea is, but gosh, that must have been beautiful. So I thought that was an interesting comment, that it could just be straight up beautiful and a wonderful thing to behold. I don't know. You had a thought? Let me see if I can find.
I was just thinking, obviously that imagery is there. They're standing next to the sea, singing the song of Moses. It's the same exact scene as in Exodus 15.
Yeah.
Exodus 15, standing on the sea and looking back, pictures two things. It pictures the deliverance of them that just happened, but it also pictures the judgment on those. You picture those soldiers with chariot wheels breaking up and water closing in on them. So the sea for them was kind of positive and a negative image. And here it could be the same. Back in 14, we heard about the smoke of the torment of those who worship the beast, and that could have some part of the image of wrath with the fire as a fully developed problem in this observation.
Yeah. And so like here, very, very brief line on it. Joel Beakey says, notice also the sea of glass is mixed with fire, giving it a reddish hue, verse 2. Some commentators say this refers to the persecution of God's people on earth. Others say the color reflects the unleashing of God's wrath in the winepress of his anger. Either way, rage, wrath, and persecution have plagued believers throughout history. So he throws it out there that possibly this is a reminder of what we have come through. And then thinking of the people of Israel, what they have come through. So, yeah, it's an interesting. Now we're going to see glass. Just so you know, as we move forward in Revelation, we're going to see. I wrote it down here. In 21:18, New Jerusalem is going to be described. And the building of the wall of it was jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And something to remember is a couple things. One, at this time in history, clear glass was very expensive, very hard to find. It was a new invention. But it also bespoke clarity, purity, and clarity and understanding. And so I wonder, this is where I get this contention of understanding and clarity. And I'll couple this also with, we're going to see in chapter 17, I believe, the sea. We're going to see another creature coming out of the sea. The sea is going to be specifically identified with the confusing mass of humanity. And so when I take these two things in concert, and I may be stretching the metaphors too far, I don't know. I think sometimes we do that, but so we see a tumultuous, sometimes confusing place now is viewed with clarity as glass. I think we've talked about that before. And but we clearly, and maybe this is from the book of James Atkins here, so you can take it or leave it, but maybe we're going to finally understand why there's suffering in the world, why there's persecution, why the saints have had to go through the fire. Maybe our eyes, the eyes of our mind, the eyes of our hearts will be opened and we'll understand God's plan. I don't know. Maybe that's what that clarity is, mixed with fire. Couple thoughts. I also think it's going to be ridiculously beautiful. I think a video I've seen of like around Hawaii with underwater volcanoes, the magma pouring up into the deep, and the light and the beauty and I think sometimes we forget that the heaven, God doesn't live, God doesn't reign, God doesn't dwell in a dump. He is the inventor, the author of beauty. So I got to think his throne room is just beautiful beyond description. So, a couple ideas for us to consider.
You said at the beginning about loving these pictures from heaven.
Yeah.
And the contrast between what's going on in heaven and what's going on earth. What we're picturing is a place outside of time where the victories are won.
Yeah.
Because to God, He sees it all. But for us, for our benefit, as creatures in time, here He's giving us a picture outside of time, assuring us that there is something because there will be no time.
Yeah.
He's picturing the reality of that and somehow being in the presence of God. But however he pictures it, he's using only images that we humans can begin to understand.
Mm.
I mean, but I was contrasting when I was thinking of the biblical piece of the people of children of Israel passing through and so victorious, so very full of joy, so very happy that they were free and the enemy that had held them captive for generations
Mm.
was no longer a threat to them. They were in the wilderness where they went to worship God. About a week later, 10 days later, they were complaining. They were saying, we're not being fed. And God gave them manna in that place of peace, where there was plenty of water. They stayed there, and God gave them manna. And then he gave them pigeons. And they had animals. They had milk and cheese and meat. But there was still all these ups and downs all through the history of Israel. And you talk about why God allows the terror.
Mm.
And there would be no terror that we've ever even begun to experience, like some of the terror that has come upon the people of Israel. And the worst thing I can compare this to is World War II,
Mm.
with science being able to create weapons of destruction, weapons of killing. That's human ingenuity being turned to killing in order to defend the freedom of one country
Mm.
against another. And one country came out on the bad end of it. One of the other countries suffered terribly, and that was Great Britain, probably more than anybody else.
Mm.
Maybe not. Maybe there were others, but Japan and Germany bore the brunt of
Mm.
the fire warfare, the fire bombs that destroyed the cities of Germany and the atomic
Wow.
bombs that finally got to Japan and leveled two cities. So we can see from history the results of evil,
Mm.
and um, so that gives us a way to imagine that future battle sounds like it's probably going to be worse than anything we've seen yet.
Mm.
And certainly humans have created the potential. That's, as I see what you've been saying, and we've all been saying, that ties into the academic side, let's say,
Mm.
Satan, the beast who is subservient to the other beast,
Yeah.
who impacts the minds of people and they think they have the truth,
Yeah.
but their truth is based on their own human understanding, 666 again. I mean, I think it just kind of fits together here
Yeah.
in some way that I'm not saying I understand. I think the themes, the imagery, all speak of humanism gone astray versus the Creator who's standing there willing and ready to bless us.
Yeah, it reminds, I really can't give that a big enough amen. And it reminds me of Romans, right? Where he gave them over to their debased mind. And, you know, it's, you, oh, it's like, my kids are pretty good about this, but this is a silly comparison. It's like two kids beg their dad for pocket knives. He's like, well, you're going to get hurt with those. You're not mature enough for them. They get pocket knives, they make sharp sticks, and they immediately come running into the house. We've poked each other with sharp sticks. And, and it's a silly example. Yeah, we gave us over. There was a line here I thought was good. Hamilton. I keep running into this guy, Hamilton. I don't know his first name, but the fire, as Hamilton writes, the fire swirling in the sea of glass appears to be a depiction of the cosmic disturbance resulting from the wrath of God. Appears to be the cosmic disturbance resulting from the wrath of God. And I really appreciate you tying in that imagery of like the firebombing of Dresden and you know, the dropping of the atomic bomb, the man's evil, man's machinations kind of carried out to their extremes to fight man's evil. You know, it's astounding.
It's interesting that how the worst of the evil was focused on the Jewish people.
It was, yeah.
Or the guardians, if you like, of the Hebrew Bible.
Mm.
And that's what the enemy was up against. Back there, where we talked about the prophet. You know, there's some, and the Jewish people are still, of course, were good to the extent that they use the scriptures rather than maybe some of their traditions,
Mm.
post-scriptural traditions, but when they're really working with the scriptures, they're still, of course, for good in the world.
Yeah. So this is good. What I want to leave you with, and it's going to be our lead into chapter 16, is really building and continuing this imagery of the people of Israel coming out of Egypt. We kind of flip the script a little bit here because now comes the plagues, but plagues nonetheless. And so we sort of bracket this chapter. We don't sort of, we bracket this chapter with this idea of the plagues are about to be unleashed. And a couple things I want you to consider next week as you read chapter 16. We've seen this before in this cycle of history. We've seen God's judgment metered out to the nations. We saw 1/3 of the population killed. Well, it started out with 1/4, and then we see it again, where 1/3 of the world is killed in the outpouring of God's wrath and justice. And when we get to chapter 16, it's going to be different. And I want you to look for some differences between previous outpourings that we've seen in Revelation of God's judgment and wrath. Look for, there's just a couple here that really lead us to conclude that this is a culminating, there's a finality to what we're going to see in chapter 16. So, and also be thinking of some comparisons and some contrasts between the plagues that we're going to see in chapter 16 and what we saw in Exodus against the people of Egypt. So, all right, guys, this has been an awesome discussion. And what I love about this class and what we've been doing here is I put a lot of study into this. I come into here and I present you the information, and you guys always help me understand it better too. So it's kind of a selfish enterprise. Our discussion, your direction, your thoughts have been really meaningful to me too. And it's a beautiful give and take here. So now that I've said that, we're going to have a terrible class next week. We'll all be overthinking it. So, all right, guys.